All right, well, looks like we have quite a few participants today, which is awesome. Thank you so much for your interest in this topic, and we will do our best to keep this meeting efficient and hopefully maybe even end early, but no promises. For all of you who may or may not have participated before, I'll just reiterate, I'm Jen Hauk. I'm the Vice President of Planning for Greener U, and I am helping to facilitate this process for the MassDEP. And today is our meeting about plastics and packaging extended producer responsibility. And we'll be going through some slides here, and then we're going to have a discussion. So some quick housekeeping stuff. If you would do me a favor, please put your full name and affiliation in the chat. I believe we have people who have registered for this meeting, but we didn't necessarily pick up your affiliation, meaning what's your role, who are you representing, where do you work, or are you a citizen and you're interested in learning more about this topic, etc. So it'd be helpful if you could do that. And then also if you could change your display name to reflect that, that would also be extremely helpful. It gives us a sense of who you represent. So while you're doing that, I will just give you a few reminders, one of which is that this group and other advisory groups are charged with performing research and presenting findings to the EPR Commission. The advisory groups will meet at least twice. This is the second meeting of the Plastics and Packaging Advisory Group, and it's most likely going to be the last meeting. We will be presenting a background document, which is, you received a draft version of that, which will probably get updated a little bit, on plastics and packaging to share with the commission. And that document is due on Friday, October 3rd. That way we can turn it around to the commission so they have enough time to read it and circulate it for their meeting, which is on Wednesday, October 29th. That is currently the final commission meeting scheduled, but we may have another meeting after that because there's a lot to discuss, and the commission recommendations are not due until January of next year. So the meeting goals for today are first to review content supplied since meeting one, and I've got a bit of a presentation that I'm going to fumble through for you. Assess missing data. So if there's anything that we didn't talk about but should, we should capture that somehow. And then have a discussion about preliminary pros and cons of a plastics and packaging EPR approach. Mostly I'm looking for talking points that the commission can spend their time reviewing. Are there any questions or comments about the meeting goals? Is there anything else anyone thinks we should cover today? Great. So for those of you who are joining a little bit later or late, we are asking you to put your name and role or affiliation in the chat, and that'll help us kind of determine who you represent or where you come from or your interest in this topic. All right, so the meeting agenda today is, again, I'm going to give you a brief presentation of combined findings, and I see that we have Scott Cassell, and he's from the PSI, Product Stewardship Institute, and we also have Greg Cooper and John Fisher from MassDEP. So I might be leaning on you three and others to help me get through this presentation of the findings that we created. We pulled it together in about 2 days earlier this week, so we're kind of just still absorbing the information, and that's my caveat for today's presentation. So then we're going to have a brief discussion again of the questions, missing data, and pros and cons, again, to queue up our discussion with the full commission. And then we'll just go through a couple of next steps, and I'll ask you for meeting feedback. So here we go with the presentation, and I'll try to make this brief. And I'll also ask that if you've got questions, just hold off on asking them until I finish. It's not going to be a long presentation, but it will be helpful just to kind of stay on track. So the first thing that we wanted to try and tackle in our brief was like what is encompassed within the definition of packaging EPR. And there were a few definitions. I think for the purposes of what is defined within EPR for plastics and packaging is really anything that is used for plastics and packaging or used for packaging, and that does not, it doesn't matter whether those materials are recyclable or not. So um, the EPA had a few pieces of definition of plastics and packaging, I guess, but not necessarily for EPR, but they included these types of products. So of course, like styrofoam is not recyclable. Aseptic packaging sometimes is recyclable, I believe. And then the rest of these items, I'm sure you all recognize. We found a little bit of data on recycling access. EPS can be recycled. Thank you, Ellie. In the US, single-family homes have a better time finding recycling access than multifamily homes. So all households have access across the US at a 73% rate, but only 43%, according to some sources, actually do take advantage of recycling. Recycling rates across the US. Now the data below in the graph is from the Recycling Partnership. The EPA and the Recycling Partnership had slightly different data on recycling rates. EPA said 32.1%. The Recycling Partnership said 21%. And so I might ask if Scott or John or Greg, if you have any thoughts on why these numbers are different, or if we just...
Composting sometimes gets conflated in and out.
Okay.
But the national on a like-for-like basis for true recycling is in the mid to upper 20s, and then composting adds another somewhere between 6 and 8%.
John or Scott or Greg, do you have a...
That's the number that you have here for EPA is the number I've always used. I've done a lot of research on the numbers and analyzed the US EPA's numbers. I can't comment on the Recycling Partnership. Perhaps someone from TRP is on the call. It looks like Dylan is here, so Dylan Thomas might be able to shed some light on that.
Yeah, okay. Oh, I see. He said the data is different because TRP was just looking at residential recycling. I see.
That's
All
right.
right. That is helpful. Thank you, Dylan. All right. So also, I think we had a comment from Claire about, yeah, this graph conflicts with other data. Yeah. So I think once we finish this presentation, let's talk about whether some of these sources are good ones to rely upon or not. So I'm just going to move forward. Oops. So recycling access in Massachusetts, we have this data from the DEP. We have different numbers from the DEP also. So John and Greg, I just want to let you know, I got your data and some of it didn't exactly align with the database that was online. So I'm using the database data, but if you want to supply some additional updates, we'll have to make sure we cite those properly. So this sort of reflects what kind of recycling access there are for Massachusetts households, with, of course, 30% of households not, or municipalities not reporting.
Hey, John, just a general comment about this data, and we can take a closer look and maybe refine it a little bit further. Some of the categories that may be either not served or underserved include residents of multifamily buildings above a certain number of units, and also single-family residents that may subscribe with private haulers outside of the municipal system. So there's the municipalities' data for their program, but then there are also some residents that may fall outside of the municipal program. And, we don't have as good data on that portion of the population, but we can maybe seek to clarify that a little bit further in our second take at this.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah, I'm glad we have an audience of like 50 people looking or 60 people looking at like slightly rushed data presentation here. So moving forward, there is kind of a breakdown according to the recycling partnership of the recycling rates for specific packaging items. And again, the recycling partnership indicates that the recycling rate is 27%, which is a little bit higher than their 21% average. So certainly it falls short. Yeah, Dylan's reminding us that it is residential recycling, and that's helpful to clarify. So as you can see, there are certain things that have higher rates of recycling than others. And it would certainly, I think the population would be assisted by some education to understand the recyclability of some of these items better. One factor that came up is that the costs of recycling to Massachusetts municipality has grown a lot. In particular during I believe it was I'm forgetting the name of it. It is like something sword from China. China had their
China National Sword Policy.
National sword policy. They stopped accepting plastic waste from Western countries, and that contributed to some significant rises in costs to municipalities, including this spike in 2020. It went from $5 in 2017 to $140 in 2020. This is making it really challenging for municipalities to figure out what to budget for recycling. MMA, they suggested there was an 18% increase in municipal solid waste and recycling processing costs in the past several years. And I think the DEP commented that this is likely due to there are more single stream recycling programs statewide. And that makes Michael, if you don't mind, if we wait until we're finished with the presentation, then we can make a comment. Thank you. Packaging EPR in Europe and Canada. There has been EPR in Europe and Canada for quite some time. In particular, Belgium was the first country to begin EPR programs. This has increased recycling rates in almost every instance except for Portugal, which has a different system apparently that is called recovery. Packaging EPR has been signed into law in 7 different states, but it's only been implemented in 1 state, and that's in Oregon, and that was last month. So we really don't have a lot of data just yet, unless we want to ask Oregon to supply some data for us. But they have different conditions for each state, as you can see here. In general, there are 4 general packaging EPR mandates sorry, I'm gonna hold off on like slide comments and stuff until we're done, because I'm gonna get very distracted as we go through these. So to comply with packaging laws, producers must join a producer responsibility organization. They must report packaging data. They must pay eco-modulation fees, and they must help meet recycling targets, and different states have different recycling targets that they use in packaging EPR. And then there are 4 reported benefits of packaging EPR, including there's greater access and participation because the financial responsibility has been shifted for recycling from taxpayers to producers. There is more consistency in terms of, and more efficiency in terms of the recycling system because of the infrastructure that has been developed. There's greater education programs, and there is greater market stability for recycled materials. David, I'm gonna hold off. So we're actually done with this presentation, and so now let's open it up for discussion. David.
Yeah, 2 slides ago, you had those frameworks for the EPR packaging policy. This one, yeah, and it says recycling targets. Is that a specific choice to say recycling targets versus waste reduction targets? Because I think that's an important distinction.
Let's see. So it may have been in the Word document itself that we shared that had more detail, and I would need to find that.
Yeah, I think it's important to know how states think about that and other jurisdictions as well. I mean, you don't have to pay to dispose of anything you don't use in the first place. And so I think, we should be aiming for waste reduction first and foremost versus just recycling. So
Yeah, so it looks like our state level targets, California had a 65% recycling rate target by 2032, Colorado 45% by 2035, and Oregon 70% recycling rate by 2050.
David, just a quick comment on that from Massachusetts perspective. This is not in an EPR context, but in our statewide solid waste master plan goal, that's framed as a disposal reduction goal.
That's good to know, because I mean, obviously we'd want our EPR policies to be consistent with the solid waste master plan. So appreciate that clarification, John.
Okay, I have Calvin who's raised his hand.
Hi. I think it's important that we look at the totality of data regarding EPR implementation in jurisdictions and their corresponding recycling rates. If you actually include all jurisdictions across the globe that have implemented EPR, less than 50% have actually observed increases in recycling rates. And we can't conflate EPR with program performance. It's actually system maturity. So programs with mature recycling infrastructure are most likely to have higher recycling rates. The presence of EPR in and of itself does not lead to a correlation of increased recycling rates. So I just thought I'd throw that out there, that the data presented was a very small subset. And if you look at the totality, it's a very different picture.
Ali Peck.
Hey, I just had a question on that pie chart you put out about Massachusetts access. And yeah, the 33% curbside recycling, is that curbside only? To me, that would be curious that a location would have only curbside and not drop off. I'm not an expert, but it just didn't make sense to me.
I
Based
think
on what
that probably, yeah, I think that we probably, I mean, the way that it's presented, we ask the question from municipalities, it probably could be limited. We say, some have curbside, but they also have drop-off recycling. So curbside access is really at 60%. You can combine the two. And I mean, so it's just a curbside community that also offers a drop-off place. So it can be a little confusing.
Okay, yeah. It looked like maybe like the 33%, maybe they just didn't understand how to answer the question, and that they would probably also be within this 28% of both instead of just one.
If they offer there's lots of communities who, even say City of Boston doesn't offer a drop off for recycling.
Okay, interesting. Okay.
So
and so I had
and in some cases there's curbside, but there's also a place you can take recyclables as a drop off.
Mhm. I had one more just comment. At the beginning, you showed a photo of what is defining packaging for EPR. Just wanted to remind everyone here that those are only the fast moving packaging goods. There is nothing in there that brings up durable goods. And just a reminder that durable goods are impacted by packaging EPR. If you want to create a system where they're not, and maybe we're scoped out, would be supportive of that. But just, when you're coming up with what the system would look like, to remember that it affects a broader pie than what is just photographed right here.
Yeah, great point, Abby. Allie, sorry. This was created very late last night. Claire, you have your hand raised?
Yes, thank you. Regarding the durable packaging, there is a carve out for that in the bill that is presented to the Mass legislature. If it's, there's certain criteria noted, and I think this is the case in other places too, where they're exempted if they're, truly durable and reusable.
Okay. I would like to switch to, so what I want to do is be able to switch my screen to be able to take notes on this discussion. So if there are no more questions about the presentation, I want to show.
Jennifer, I don't know how to hit the hand raising thing. I can't find it. So
Okay.
I would. I'd like to just bring a point of clarity. Your slide that showed the rate of increase of cost of disposal, you have to factor in the fact that in the state of Massachusetts, there's been a dramatic reduction in landfill capacity as a result of policy. And that was the bigger driver of post-collection cost increase. There is, in fact, yes, a relationship to National Sword. What the industry did post-National Sword beginning in 2020 was conclude they no longer could be at the risk of a commodity swing and move the model from a commodity-based structure to process fee at the MRF, which then began to reflect the true cost of what it would take to put single stream volume through a recycling facility, and they would charge a tip fee. They're now running, the private sector at least is running recycling like a manufacturing operation. So that did specifically to recycling tip fees have that impact. But the bigger post-collection impact is the dramatic reduction in available disposal capacity inside the state of Massachusetts that drove up tip fees. And in particular, what you could follow is the city of Boston's every 5-year disposal contracts. If you go back 15 years, you can see how those rates have compounded because of the increasing shrinkage of disposal capacity.
To clarify, this data is recycling costs only, not solid waste disposal costs.
Okay, well, it was reflected as post-collection, so just to be clear, but even the recycling side is being driven by a move away from a reliance on commodities to fund a recycling program to we're now going to run it as a manufacturing operation, and now truly reflects the real cost of processing.
Yeah, I guess I would, say that obviously the state's policy has not influenced, disposal capacity. I mean, we've been trying to, and allow landfill permitting, no one's coming in. So that's been kind of more of a scene that you see with the more densely populated, states. But I think that what I would say, part of it is China Sword, part of it is the model of facilities saying they want to basically charge the cost of running their equipment and deal with whatever revenues are after that, so that they can not get hit by big market fluctuations. And then, the movement of the industry to single stream has definitely benefited the amount of material being collected, but it also, costs a lot more for them to process. And it also involves getting more contamination, which has been a historical problem. So the shift of moving towards a single stream, big bin, closed bin, has lowered collection costs, but dramatically increased the processing side of things.
Michael, can you, we're gonna have,
Mhm.
Jose.
Well, this certainly would warrant why our ask that we be given an opportunity to make a light presentation to be able to share with you what really is happening would be useful.
And I would reiterate that as well. And we have, who had created this presentation? That's was this by DEP staff?
This was by me.
Okay.
So this was based on, we asked, Lou, I think you weren't able to make it to the first
Right,
meeting.
right. I
So
I viewed it afterwards, but yeah.
Right. So we asked this group, whoever showed up for this group, to please, like they identified issues, and we had volunteers submit data to be included in a review of research. And then my colleague and I pulled together this data Monday and Tuesday this week.
Okay.
To send it out. So it's a kind of a rush job, and it was dependent upon what we could find and what was sent to us.
Okay, thanks.
Did you? Okay. So Jose.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I apologize. I was not able to make the first meeting, but I was able to catch up on most of the previous meeting. I guess I had a question on you mentioned that I think it was 27% was the recycling rate for Massachusetts. How did we compare nationally?
We
Is
are higher than the national rate, using the same, I believe, the residential rates from the recycling partnership. The national rate was 21%.
okay. And then I know we're talking about data, and there's still not a lot of data out, particularly from places like Oregon, although we're seeing stuff from European countries and Ontario. I guess I'm curious to know more data. I mean, I'm here representing Arise for Social Justice, but I'm also a Springfield City Councilor, and I know that we have been one of the cities that have gone into single stream and have seen an increase in recycling. And I know in speaking with our DPW director that we also utilize some of I guess when we're recycling, we get some of that money back. And so I'm just curious to hear more from some of our other municipalities or folks that might be representing other municipalities, how they're doing and what are the recycling rates for municipalities within the state. I know you guys did the survey, so I don't know. Seems like 30% didn't answer, but I guess there's a lot more data and information I'm seeking on this, especially since this topic itself deals with a lot more. I know the past topics we've had mattresses, we've talked about paint, we've talked about batteries, which are things that I would say as a consumer, we purchase less often. But when you're talking about plastics, this is something that, especially with Amazon and everything going on, these are regularly purchased items. And so I want to make sure that I have as much data and information to make a really informed decision as respect to the impacts, not only to municipalities, the state, but also to consumers, especially in a really inflationary period where my fear of that hitting every single thing that people buy, particularly in groceries. So I think there's a lot of data I'm really looking for. So if there's anybody on the municipalities, love to know more on that.
Okay. Claire, do you have a response to that?
Yeah, I work for 18 municipalities, and the term recycling rate is a little confusing. It used to be the amount of recyclables compared with our totality of our trash plus recycling. It seems to now be using instead of the term recovery rate, which I prefer because I think it's more descriptive of how much of a particular material we're recovering that is recyclable. And we can't get to that data on a municipal side. All I can offer is a recycling rate, which is the amount recycled divided by recycled plus disposed. So that's the old-fashioned term for recycling rate. And that in my towns is in the 20% to 30% range. Also, so it's really kind of you need a good denominator to get at an actual recovery rate. which is now being called recycling rate apparently. And you can't really do that on the municipal level because you need the aggregate tonnage that's coming into the state or that's coming in that to use for the denominator. So I don't know if that's answering your question, but I think that's a data point that, you know, unless you go into people's houses and find out exactly what they're buying and what the weight of it is versus what, or compare it with the waste composition study, which is a little indirect. And that takes the disposal stream. The state had the combustor facilities, municipal waste combustors, every 3 years conduct a waste composition study where they do sort out all the trash that's coming in to the disposal facilities and see how much of it is actually recyclable. And I've done some math on that, and yeah, the recovery rates are, I don't have them off the top of my head, but they're pretty much in line with what the state has said, you know, in the 20s, 20 to 30% range. So I hope that clarifies things for you.
No, thank you, Clara. I mean, got most of it. I mean, I think there's still a lot of, yeah, a lot of data that I'm kind of seeking, but thank you for that.
John?
I just wanted to follow up on a couple of these comments and also reference one in the chat. So I think Claire makes a good point about recycling rates versus recovery rates. And when we talk about recycling rates in quotes, I think the main thing is we have to be very explicit about what we're talking about, because sometimes different people use recycling rate in different ways, and we just have to be very clear and transparent about what data we're citing when we do that, so we can make sure we're clear about that in an updated version of this. I also wanted to reference, there's a comment, and this relates a little bit to Jose's point, but I think also from Steve Buck-Sansky in the chat about access levels in Massachusetts. I think we can also present a little more refined Massachusetts specific version of that in our next version of this. There will be some uncertainty because we have uncertainty with data for households outside of municipal programs, but I think we can do a better job of summarizing the data that we have, and in doing so also clarify where there's some uncertainty with the data.
That would be helpful, John. Thank you.
Great. Any other questions about the data that was presented? Anything else you want to highlight that we should take a second look at? Claire?
I'm sorry to keep talking. I have had a burning question. Now, residential, does that include congregate housing such as assisted living facilities and those types of places? We now have more and more places where you can go independent, assisted, nursing home, all in one. Is that included in the universe of residential?
That's probably a question for the recycling partnership, because I think that's the source of the 27%.
Yeah, so Dylan is saying residential recycling rate, but I think maybe Claire, your question has to do with the data that we got from municipalities about recycling rates across Massachusetts.
No.
No?
No, we don't calculate a recycling rate
Okay.
in Massachusetts, and there's a number of reasons for that. But so the data that was presented was from the recycling partnership analysis with a 27% recycling rate, and the recycling rates, the materials that you listed there, and it was as it was described as residential only, so it didn't include commercial recycling. And I think Claire's question is, does that include assisted living and the other sources? And that's something that we'd have to ask the recycling partnership. I mean, it gets a little blurry because you've got, for example, you'll have maybe a city's program does service a public housing authority, or does serve they serve certain multifamilies up to a certain size and not the other ones. We have pretty good data on households served by municipal programs because we asked them to report that. And that is about 75% in general, 75% of the population in curbside communities has access. So that means 25% are large apartment buildings, condo associations, things that are not serviced by the municipal program. And we don't know what service they have because they're independently contracting for that service. They may be getting recycling service, they may not. We get plenty of calls regarding people not having recycling service. So that's the kind of unknown in a bigger general sense.
Okay. David?
Thanks. I have a question for, I don't know if it's John or Scott or if it's a further research question, but is it your sense that jurisdictions with EPR systems have better data? My hypothesis here is that, part of the value of establishing a PRO is that the regulator, i.e. DEP, would be able to, ask for and receive some of this information that folks here are saying, we don't have or we don't have consistently. But is that in practice is, again, I'm kind of looking at Scott or John, but maybe it's a question for later. Like, do jurisdictions that have EPR, does that help them answer some of these fundamental questions that we're talking about now?
Well, I can jump in and say that for the states with EPR laws and in many of the bills, doing this deep dive data analysis is a first step. Now, of course, MassDEP and most states do their own, analyses, and as John mentioned, there's certain performance goals that Massachusetts has here. But there's needs assessment, something called like a gap analysis in terms of the infrastructure. So those deep dives called a needs analysis is a first step. And some states like Maryland and Illinois just had, bills that had the needs analysis first before then approaching legislation as a first step. So it goes deeper. And I'd say those states, certainly the 7 that have laws, and particularly those that have finished their needs analyses, do have more data and better data and go into it. I would probably defer here to Dylan at the Recycling Partnership because they've done this deep dive on an analysis fairly recently. I think there's just it depends on what you're counting, how you're counting it, and these are negotiated and discussions that many people on this call may have different opinions about here. So I think discussions about data is a very lengthy process, but that's where that happens in the needs analyses. They get into that level, and there's an advisory council of multi-stakeholder in each of these states on all of these bills that bears, they consult, if you will, to the producer responsibility organization, and then ultimately the state makes a decision on these things. But that's where the data is deeper dives, and I would go to some of those states.
That's helpful, and I see others' hands up, so I just want to briefly follow up. Like, to my mind, some of what Claire and John were saying initially about recovery rates and needing to have consistent data about it would seem to me that a good first step is having clearer, more consistent data from the producers about what's going out there in the first place. And so I think being thoughtful about using the establishment of an EPR system to better leverage all the stakeholders and their ability to inform DEP's decision making, I think would be wise.
Yes,
Just
and
a
as you can
real
see
quick,
from the discussion
sorry.
here, if I could just finish, that there's a lot of disagreements over things, and this ultimately will have to be DEP's decision. on how they move forward, for the state with all of the input that they're getting in Massachusetts and outside here. So over to you, John.
Yeah, just real quick on the David, on the Massachusetts data part of that. The gap I see with our data is for residents that are not served by municipal programs. That's where we have the most uncertainty and the lack of information. So just specific to mass data, that's just a quick comment on kind of where we have a little bit of a data gap.
Thank you. Calvin, we'll go to you.
Yeah, if I could just add some context and color from a Canadian perspective. So jurisdictions with EPR, such as Ontario, Manitoba, BC, have extraordinarily robust data with respect to municipal operations, recovery data. It's a kind of contingent that data exists in order to accurately set fees. So EPR in and of itself does provide a mechanism for providing robust data. With that being said, it's an extraordinarily time and resource intensive activity to collect that data and set up the medium in which that data is submitted. So we use something called the data call. That was a 3-year process in Ontario to kind of develop that mechanism, and every year it needs to be readjusted. So essentially, this comment is to elaborate to say that EPR definitely can contribute to a better understanding and more robust data for those specific jurisdictions. However, we need to understand that there are some significant growing pains associated with obtaining that data and developing the infrastructure and mechanisms for reporting for municipalities.
Thank you. Sarah? Oh, Sarah, we can't hear you. Even though I don't think you're muted, but we can't hear you.
I am not muted.
Oh, there you go. Now we can hear you.
Good. So I just like to say that the simple act of completing a needs assessment does not give you great data. I mean, we've had several conversations with HDR, which has done some of those needs assessments, and they're still frustrated at the quality and completeness of the data they've received in those, including in Maryland and Colorado, and are working to find ways to get better data. Part of the problem is that there isn't a good data security system, right? Collectors and processors are concerned about turning their data in because they feel like they're not protected, and so the data security is not acceptable. Producers are having similar responses in providing data, and so the simple act of completing that study is not going to get you robust data. Over time, within an EPR system, you may get better data, but it doesn't happen right at the beginning. And so, because it goes back to those communities that, as you all are saying, don't have great data now to answer a lot of the questions. It goes back to the haulers to answer the questions. And if they don't have it or they're not willing to share it, you're not going to get it. Thank you.
Thank you. Dylan, looks like you have a response to that.
Oh, yeah. I just wanted to say that a fair amount of that, I mean, obviously data is collected by state agencies on a regular basis. There are, robust assurances that there is data security for that data, but a fair number of those service providers, as well as some of the communities, didn't end up sharing those data with the consultants. Just in part because they opposed the legislation itself, and they were not compelled by the legislation to share those data with the state agencies. And I just wanted to say it's a little bit more complicated than it's being represented, but obviously this is something that is of great. There's as Scott was saying, there's a great amount of disagreement in this space, and so a fair amount of high emotion connected to it, but we do expect there to be a robust data set that is going to grow. I do want to also correct the record in terms of the producer data, as that information is required by the legislation. We do expect there to be great source data for the packaging that is being sold in those states, because that's what the fees are based on. And so and they are required to report that to the PRO. And they do have assurances for the PRO, which currently the primary PRO in the US is Circular Action Alliance, that they do have strong data security. So just wanted to correct some of the record there.
Thank you. Michael?
Sorry, no, you can't say that. We are happy to provide data if you give us the assurances that the data will be secured. The problem is that except for the state of Illinois, which had legislation that assured that a FOIA request could not be made and therefore the data would be given away. If we're going to have data collected, we want it to be done by an independent third party like the accounting industry. So the CPAs, the Ernst & Youngs of the world. This is on the needs assessment side, and therefore the needs assessments that have been done have been flawed because we cannot be given assurances about that. It's a false statement that we didn't want to give it. If there was a program and it's happening, we would much rather have the information be accurate. We just can't be given assurances that proprietary company data won't be released. And neither the PRO, the consultants, or state agencies can give us those assurances unless there's legislation in place. And the accounting industry actually has a burden of care from a regulatory standpoint that it gives us that comfort.
That's helpful. Thank you. David?
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, like that seems like a relatively easy thing to include in legislation. I hear the industry concern that, you don't want your proprietary data shared, but, that seems like a very, either specifically exempting it from public records requests, aggregating and de-identifying it. It is, I would encourage other commission members on this call to not let the data security issue like spiral out of control. I think that that's something that, and if folks do want to suggest language to include in EPR legislation, I think people would be open to that. But I think that that is easily something that could be baked into statute.
Yeah, except that's a cart and a horse. If you want to do a needs analysis, you have to have that legislation in advance of the EPR legislation.
Well, that could be a effective dates question, not a two different pieces of legislation question.
So what I would tell you is the record of this speaks for itself. Every single state where we push for just that, they refuse to do so.
I would say that I can't read and type your notes at the same time. So if you're putting things in the comments, I'm not going to be able to see those unless I don't type. So if you have a comment, could you raise your hand and share it?
So I wanted to, it shows up as Michael Hoffman. I don't know why, but this is Ann Germain with the National Waste and Recycling Association. I wanted to mention that the push for a needs assessment is something that NWRA's members have been doing since the get-go. We did get some support from the state of Illinois, and so we've been fully supportive of that because it is protective of the industry. Colorado, one of the things that the industry objected to strongly was the lack of protection for the industry. In there, we were not able to respond to a lot of questions. And when we spoke with CAA, they specifically told us that producer data was protected by statute, but that industry data was not. And so we have been trying to work to develop language that would be protective of industry, to Michael's point about making sure that it goes through a third party, that it's disaggregated, that it has at least 4 companies that are contributing data so that it can be anonymized. So this is something that we've strongly pushed for, is to have needs assessments conducted, but not to a point where then our data is exposes our company's confidential business information.
Claire.
Hi, I put this in the chat, but since you asked for it verbally,
Thank you.
The bills that are in the Mass legislature now do have protections. The data is supposed to go to a CPA firm, be aggregated. Whether it's sufficient, is something that, redrafts, could address with some industry input. But I think it was the language is based on something from the Illinois bill and our needs assessment bill. So those concerns are considered. Whether they're addressed sufficiently, I can't say, but I invite the industry people to take a look at that and see how it could be improved.
Great. Christopher.
Yeah, hi everyone. Chris Antonacci, USA Waste. I'd just like to go back to the data on the cost side. I think you had a slide there with recycling rates in Europe. I don't know what those are in British Columbia, Ontario. It seems like those are more akin to kind of our economy and whatnot. But what's I think missing here is any analysis or any information on the cost of these programs. I think Mr. Delgado kind of alluded to it, but also I think Colorado had a needs assessment which showed what these programs could cost. And I think California is well on that way. And I think it's surprising a lot of people. I don't think any responsible decision is made without a true analysis of this. British Columbia and Ontario, I think, have seen multiple years of double-digit increases in program costs, which frankly are going to dwarf those figures that were put on the screen for Massachusetts over the last 10 years. So I implore everyone to try to look at both sides of this. And that cost is a very real issue here, and this is could be very impactful.
Is that, just one follow-up on this, is that because the cost impact would be the fact that there would need to be service for recycling provided to a large portion, according to our estimates, 25% of the population doesn't have recycling service? Is that where the cost impact comes? Or, I kind of look at it more as a cost shifting. Municipalities and taxpayers are paying for recycling service now, and they're seeing cost increase that they can't really control themselves through what they buy. They're buying stuff that is provided to them in packaging that they don't really have much choice relative to. So I guess I'm just trying to figure out, is that a cost? What would be the cost increase? Net increase, I guess I would say.
Sorry, just Mr. Cooper, what was the 25% population that doesn't have service? Where is that from? In Massachusetts?
We basically count, we don't know for certain, but we know that 75% of the population gets serviced by a curbside program municipally run. The other 25%, we don't know but we do know that a good chunk of them don't have service because they keep calling us all the time, asking how come they don't have service. And so
is that on a municipality basis or a population basis?
That's a household basis. So
I'm out here in Western Mass. It's not in my experience in our service area that 25% doesn't have drop off or curbside available.
Well, wait, I'm talking about, when we talk about service, we like to talk about is, if you're getting curbside trash, you get curbside recycling. If you're getting drop off trash, you get drop off recycling. So a lot of communities, I live in one in Massachusetts where we have 10,000 households. We've got a drop off program that serves about maybe 3,500 of those households. The other 7,500 are contracting with independent private haulers for service.
Okay.
Whether they are providing recycling service with that or not is a question for the consumer to make a decision on whether they want to pay for that service or not. So you can imagine it,
Well,
we don't know the exact number, but it's definitely providing.
I can only speak for our company, and we don't provide trash without recycling residential service. We have a co-collection system. If you get our trash residential, you get our recycling residential. There's no option to just pick up trash. In Connecticut, it's a law that you have to if you provide it. I mean, there's other options here too. If that's an issue, I mean, maybe that's an easier issue that everyone can agree on, that if you're providing residential waste pickup, you got to provide residential recycling pickup. That one, I think everyone could get on board with tomorrow. Makes
We
sense.
don't have that in Massachusetts.
And so I guess, Greg, back to your point, though, thank you for the clarification on the cost, is that I think and I've read Chaz Miller's cost analysis on British Columbia. He's done a lot of work on that. I think I see Professor Lacken here. He's done a lot of work on the Ontario system. So I would defer to maybe him, since he's the research expert on Ontario, as to where these cost increase come from. But I think Colorado found a lot of those. Colorado, for instance, is a very different state than Massachusetts. Its access to recycling was significantly lower than Massachusetts on any scale, right? They have very rural populations that they now have service. That cost is socialized across the state in Colorado, right? And so does EPR work there as opposed to Massachusetts? Maybe. I don't know. Massachusetts, different population, different demographics, different geography. But I know when you layer on top of an existing system that's working, as a top 5 state in recycling across almost every metric, and you layer on top of that system multiple layers of bureaucracy, costs aren't going to go down.
Just to be clear, in Colorado, there's 6 million people, 5 million on the Front Range, 500,000 in the mountains, 500,000 in the plains. 5 million, they have a high degree of access, but a modest participation rate. But the access is there on 90% of the population. And they're basically going to subsidize for 1 million for 20% of the population using EPR.
Jose?
Thank you. Sorry, I was doing some Googling. I know we're talking about costs, and I watched most of the video from the last meeting. Did we ever address, I know some of the video talked about, I don't know who it was that said it, but pretty much said there was little cost to consumers. But I want to get back to that piece. I know we're talking about municipalities and state government as representing Arise for Social Justice. Do we have data on what those costs to consumers are? I think that's a big piece that I want to look at. And when I was doing some of my Googling, I noticed that the state of Connecticut, I guess there was opposition, particularly from the Black and Latino caucus. So are there other opponents that have pushed back on this in other states? Because we've seen examples of the states that have passed it. Are there examples of states that have pushed back, like Connecticut? Because I'd like to learn more on that as well. So the cost piece to consumers, and then has every state that's pushed this passed it?
Does anybody have an immediate response to that? Is Scott still with us? Do you have any
I'm
thoughts?
still here. It's a great question. It is fraught with disagreement. Where it's a very, very long conversation, and I'm sure that you'll find many opinions on this call. There's different data. One individual on the call has done a study on this to show that consumer costs will likely increase or will increase. There's other studies as well that have shown the opposite. And I think this is maybe a session to put aside here. It's a really good question, but you're going to find many different answers depending upon the approach to EPR and the belief in whether or not an EPR system can increase recycling and performance and is the right strategy versus maybe some other strategy they would propose.
Is this something that we want to put aside or dig into more deeply and highlight what the differences are in terms of the methodologies of those studies?
Well, yeah, Calvin will have something to say about it. I think it's a good idea for Massachusetts to understand the different studies and to do what many of the other states have done, which is to have the different individuals who have developed those studies speak about them. We ourselves here have been in touch with producers from Europe. One individual who runs sort of an association of producer responsibility organizations, and they testified in Connecticut saying that there's been no indication of any increase in consumer prices in any of those countries with the EPR laws. So they don't believe that it increases, and they've been running these programs for up to 35 years. But there are different opinions.
If I can just echo Scott's sentiments, I think this is a topic worthy of dedicated discussion. And to Scott's point, I think there's a lot of differing opinions, and it's worthwhile to understand the methodology and data that went into that analysis. And so even though I present, a very different perspective than others, it's always good to kind of put all of our cards on the table. I just wanted to return back to the previous conversation, and Michael posted a really great comment in the chat. Just to give you some context for Ontario, and I'm just going to present these numbers. These are factual numbers, and I'll let you take away what you will from it. So between 2002 and 2020, the cost of Ontario's Blue Box program tripled. Between 2020 and 2024, it doubled. They estimate that between 2024 and 2030, the program cost will triple. These cost increases have been so significant that the Ministry of Environment in Ontario has chosen to scale back its EPR legislation and reduce its purview given the rapid cost escalation. So without getting into discussion in terms of impact on consumers, we're facing multi-billion-dollar costs for a residential recycling program in Ontario. And to the earlier point about Ontario's access levels, we've maintained a 95% access level since 2002. So our access levels have actually gone down under EPR legislation for reasons that I won't necessarily be able to get into. So it's not, the cost of drivers have nothing to do with providing increased access. It's strictly to do with the cost of implementing the program. And so I thought that's important context to provide.
Peter?
Peter Beerbaum, One World Resource. Just wanted to share quickly a few resources. If you look at the circular action line plans for both Colorado and Oregon, those are actual costs that are being passed on to the producers. And you can see the breakout associated with each of those costs. They are very different programs just within those two states. And of course, very different from what you're looking at in California or what you're considering in Massachusetts. Also, California has what they call their standardized regulatory impact assessment, a very detailed cost analysis of what their program's going to cost. And it averages for producers, just for reporting, $2,478. And then the average total cost on an annual basis is $384,224 for each producer. So it has a breakout that's pretty clear, showing how much is associated with the program, how much is associated with packaging changes, whether they're source reduction or switching to a recyclable or compostable packaging. It's a detailed resource, and again, it's just one out there.
Could you tell me again what the resource was so I can make sure I get these numbers right?
Sure, it's the California Standardized Regulatory Impact Assessment. They refer to it as SRIA, and it was published June 30, 2025. They had an earlier version and they just updated it too as well.
Thank you. Juanita.
I just wanted to address a comment from a while ago about the inefficiency and bureaucracy relating to these systems. Right now in Massachusetts, our system is to have 351 separate teeny tiny geographic jurisdictions recreate the wheel and take care of their constituents. It is probably the most inefficient way you could do it if you were to design a system. And the amount of overhead relating to administrative costs and the lack of expertise from the municipal sector on negotiating with the hauling companies is costing taxpayers millions and millions and millions of extra dollars per year because our system is so inefficient currently. Switching to a statewide system like EPR would be a dramatic improvement compared to what we have right now in offering consistent service for a much more cost-effective price point when looking at the system as a whole. We don't have good data right now on what it costs. And as has been brought up, every single program is a fingerprint. They're all different on who gets service, who doesn't get service. We need more uniformity, and I don't know how we get better data to make better decisions. I just know that right now, the system as it is terrible, and we can only go up from where we are. Everything that could be done has been done, minus the one policy mechanism that was brought up that Connecticut has that Massachusetts does not, which requires haulers across the state to provide recycling with trash. I know certain communities have done that, but not as a whole state. I just think that looking very big picture, we need to pay attention to how much Massachusetts has tried already, and we still don't have great access. Probably better than many other states, but it's still not, it's not 95%. There's no way it's 95%. We need a major reform in order to make improvements for everyone that lives within the state. And people are paying for it right now, whether they recognize it or not. As far as consumer costs increasing, there's a high likelihood that either a tax increase could be offset if funding were fed into the system, or that costs would be, if consumers are paying out of pocket right now, that those costs would be decreased. So there is some offset that has not yet been brought up.
Claire.
I was actually going to say a lot of what Juanita just said. My municipalities, I mean, the current costs are not being considered in these consumer cost discussions. We're currently the taxpayers are paying a ton of money, the ratepayers. The costs, the fees that my towns are charging are now being raised by large amounts because they're realizing that these indirect costs are affecting their municipal budgets, which are really, really constrained. I've had some towns raise their rates by, 30-40% in the last year as they realize they're just bleeding money from the increased recycling costs. And most of the waste management costs increases that we've seen recently are due to the recycling costs, which have gone up quite a bit in an effort to clean up our loads, because contamination, as has been pointed out, is a huge problem. it's very difficult to educate residents about what can and can't go in to the recycling bin because a lot of non-recyclable packaging is being put out there, getting mixed in, making it more difficult to sort the material at the facilities and to have clean loads that have high value for manufacturers. They can't make, I say they can't make cardboard out of pizza, you know? So I think that that number also needs to be looked at in context with the proposed or the anticipated consumer cost, which I believe will be vastly less than what people are currently paying and the rising rates that they're experiencing.
Thank you. Lou.
I just wanted to follow up on something that Mr. Delgado had asked earlier about other states not passing EPR due to cost. And cost was the number one issue in New York when the bill did not pass last year. So, and California as well, Governor Newsom sent the regulations back to Cal Recycle because he was concerned about the cost. So there are other states where cost is a major factor that's being dealt with. So,
Calvin?
Yeah, just going back to the comments made earlier regarding municipal taxation. So I want to preface this by saying that every jurisdiction is different. But the university did what we call a meta-analysis of BC, Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec to see whether property taxes, which is kind of how we build in our fees for residential waste collection recycling, were affected by the adoption of EPR, and they were not. So in fact, taxation increased in every jurisdiction. There was no observed savings. And I want to qualify that as well by saying sometimes it's difficult to specifically isolate the effects of reduction in recycling rate cost as it pertains to property taxes. But we did not observe an offset in the municipal tax base as a result of adopting EPR. And I think one of the challenges that I think municipalities specifically face is the imposed administrative burden of reporting into something like a data call or providing the necessary information back to a reporting or regulatory body. So there's a lot of what we characterize as administrative externalities, specifically as a result of EPR, that further muddy the waters. So this is broaching into the conversation of impacts on consumers, which we won't get into, but it's just a very complex issue. But I just thought I'd share that we did conduct that analysis in Canada, and we didn't see a reduction in the municipal tax base.
David?
Thanks. Yeah, sorry to sound like the environmentalist on the call, but Juanita and Claire are very rightfully talking about the direct costs associated with disposing of the stuff that we actually dispose of. We should also have to factor in, the many externalities and indirect costs associated with just the amount of waste that enters the environment. Many of the product categories we're talking about contain PFAS, which is a huge both public health cost and also cost for municipalities to monitor and mitigate water quality impacts. There are myriad other air and water quality impacts associated with plastic and other contamination in the environment. And the carbon emissions generated by producing more of this stuff rather than reducing our overall waste are significant. And so, if we're going to talk, it's one thing to talk about, what I think is a justifiable shift of cost from just purely disposal, but there's also a hidden cost here of the amount of, frankly, just material going out into the environment that is not being disposed of properly, that is harmful for the environment, and the costs associated with that.
I'm glad you brought that up. Scott?
Yeah, I think this is a great discussion, and I want to thank Juanita for widening the scope of it, and also Calvin for the complexity of this, and David's comment and Claire's here is that the EPR movement is because of all of these reasons. The movement away from impacts, externalities, and increasing business. if you think about the waste that is going into whether it's landfills, and I was, there, DEP, Mass EEA, when we closed 100 landfills, they're unlined ones. And as the disposal capacity, goes down, then this waste, as Michael and others know, is shipped far distances here. It is complex, but the way I think about it is the Massachusetts Water Resources Authority fixed leaking pipes, water and wastewater treatment. They spent a lot of money to firm up the system and make it a system that has cleaned up the Charles River and reduced the loss of water that are being transported. And this system, as Juanita mentioned, that we have in Massachusetts, is like a leaking bucket. It's like leaking pipes, and it's a system that needs to be firmed up. You are going to reduce the externalities here, and we can go into all of those and argue about them. But there's also going to be a lot of businesses that will be thriving from recycling. Instead of this material being disposed of, it's going to be recycled. And we're seeing more innovation all the time, and these systems are meant to and will, over time, incentivize the sustainable packaging and other materials. And that is going to be better all around, and it'll give an incentive or competitive advantage for those companies that are making sustainable packaging. Right now, they're at a disadvantage in the current system. And so I think we're talking about an entire system overhaul. It's a big job. And these are all the right questions to ask, and concerns and consumer prices. And so Massachusetts is just starting to enter into that discussion, which has, taken place in other states for a very long time. And I just want to thank everyone here for engaging in this kind of discussion.
Thank you. Christopher?
Yeah, I guess a couple questions. My first is in terms of what Scott was saying, that I guess a question for Scott or anyone else on the call is, you said that a bunch of companies are going to be thriving because of this. And I would like someone with experience from a jurisdiction, maybe BC or Ontario, to describe the experience they've seen. My understanding is that there were a very select few winners of that system, and many multi-generational family businesses, recyclers, whatnot, all went out of business because they were not selected by the PRO. And so it was no longer a competitive industry. Those smaller players could not compete with the large public companies that were well-funded, well-heeled, and they had to sell out for pennies on the dollars. So that's the first one. I guess, my second one is a little bit unrelated, but I was wondering if DEP or anyone else on the call had any reaction to the federal lawsuit filed in Oregon on behalf, I believe, of the Retailers Association against that EPR scheme.
I can't comment on that lawsuit in Oregon. I'm not familiar with that, so I couldn't comment on that. I would say that industry consolidation has already happened here in Massachusetts.
Okay, that's a true statement in itself, but there's still a significant number of independent haulers in the state that could be negatively impacted. And then the lawsuit was actually filed in federal district court by the National Association of Wholesale Distributors. And it was specifically focused at the federal level.
Claire?
The EPR model that's proposed by Senator DiDomenico does not give the PRO the power to award any contracts to processors. it's a reimbursement system, and it would also reimburse small haulers for the cost of recycling. So the model that's in Massachusetts would address the concerns that Christopher had.
Great. Other comments? Mike?
Hey everybody, this is Mike Noel from Tomra. First of all, great discussion here, and then I wasn't on the last one, but I read the notes and it looks also like a good discussion. If, given the group is looking into and trying to get a handle on EPR for packaging, it seems like a good avenue of research and inquiry is the lessons learned in the existing EPR for packaging programs. There's, dozens around the world, many of which have been in place for decades, and they continue to evolve. So sometimes in the call, this, it's referred to as like with EPR does this or that. And it's like, I know those who are experts in the space will tell you it really depends, it's not really apples to apples in a lot of cases. It depends on a few key elements within the EPR program. So is there, are there learnings about which EPR programs are more effective than others? I just bring it, not that I'm a direct expert on it, but I know like one of the key learnings that the EU has done, they've kind of overhauled some of their EPR for packaging programs, and one modification they've made is how they define recycling. Previously, it was essentially the collection of packaging, and they've since refined that to be the amount of material that is used in an input to final recycling. So I think what most of us would consider true recycling rather than just collection. And like that's just one small example of how they've continued to tweak their program. And I'm guessing that over time through transparency and performance targets will lead to higher recycling rates. So that seems, if the group is continuing to do research or commissioning somebody to do research, some research into this best practices is probably going to be enlightening.
Mike, can you just tell me again which group you represent? You just said
Tomra, Tomra. We provide optical sorters for material recovery facilities, secondary sorting facilities. We provide a lot of the back-end services for Massachusetts container deposit program and those of the programs around the world, and some of the reverse logistics technologies for those both deposit, EPR, and voluntary recycling systems.
Thank you so much. Anyone else?
I just wanted to thank Claire for that nugget that you gave us on the bill, because I want to be sensitive to the current industry that's here. I think I made these comments at the battery meeting when one of the individuals mentioned a bill that would limit that and hurt them. And so I don't think we should be in the business of hurting businesses that are already established, and we should be encouraging more recycling, not less. So I just wanted to thank you for that piece, and want to be sensitive to the current industry that is doing the work currently in the state. So
thank you. Christopher?
Yeah, hi again. I did just want to respond, I think, to Juanita's comments a little bit earlier about I'm sorry, I'm going to paraphrase, but what do we got to lose, right? I would caution that Massachusetts is like I said before, a top 5 state in recycling across all metrics. It has modern MRFs, the likes of which compete with anything in North America or Europe for that matter. The existing recyclers here are already investing. I challenge I believe that access is either curbside or drop off. I believe it's well north of 95%. Whether people take advantage of that access or not is a different story. But in terms of pure population, the city of Boston has access. That's a big percentage right there. The city of Worcester has access. That's a big percentage right there. City of Springfield has access. If you just go by the cities, it's a large percentage of the overall population has access. It can go backwards. It can go sideways, right? The companies here that have been doing the work for 40 years in recycling since the mid 80s, early 80s, have invested, and we've been here. The risk is that you take control from industry and the municipalities, and you give it to an unknown PRO where there's dispersed responsibility. Nobody takes the ball. It's companies that are located in Denmark and huge multinational conglomerates are running the show. And they're going to decide how much to invest back into the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And they're going to say, well, I don't think we should invest $50 million into a new MRF. We just built one 10 years ago. Well, but maybe the technology warrants it. That's what our companies do now. We're the experts in the field. They're not. They make really good chips. They make really good drinks, right? They don't recycle. It can go backwards. And this scheme threatens to take control of recycling, all of our products, everything that we care so deeply about, the environmental benefits, making sure we do it the right way, making sure we recover so much, and place it into hands of multinational conglomerates with no direct responsibility. And so I caution that it could cause or create a disincentive to investment in the Commonwealth. It could create this far off, unknown responsibility for actually managing it. And so it can get worse. And I frankly, I honestly and sincerely believe that. And so I just caution everyone to think about that.
Thanks. Juanita?
I hear your concerns. I guess I think a higher level portion of this conversation is there's been so many different models of EPR referenced by different stakeholder groups. And right now in Massachusetts, we only have one bill, and it is not a producer response. It's not a producer led scheme. Like that's just not how it would be set up in the current bill in Massachusetts. There is such a spectrum of producer control versus municipal control and hauler industry control, that all those different levers can be played with. And in the 7 laws that have been passed, they all are different on what that looks like. I think that that's a big area of that there's a ton of room for discussion. And I would say right now in Massachusetts that no one is pushing for that model of full producer control. I would say from running a municipal program, I would love to be able to trust that that could happen and yeah, hand over the control of a municipal system. As I said, I think there's so much inefficiency in the current system that is overlooked, because other stakeholder groups besides municipalities and besides taxpayers benefit from those inefficiencies. I'll just say it, haulers benefit in Massachusetts because of the inefficiency of having 351 tiny jurisdictions have separate contracts. That creates inefficiency by having, I work for the city of Newton. It's 18 square miles. Our neighboring towns are even smaller than that. And we all have different contracts. I could go on about that, but I also wanted to address a different point about the access. So all these large cities were brought up as having providing curbside collection. While that's true, Boston and Springfield and Worcester provide curbside collection. They do not provide that collection equally to everyone. So enormous high-rise buildings that house 300 units may not have recycling access because it's not provided by the city. So there is this disproportionate high density population that does not have service and is not captured in DEP's data about who has access and who doesn't. And so a high-rise building that does not have recycling access is not counted anywhere right now. And that's kind of in this like data gap. And that's happening in every single community. And worse, every single municipality has an ordinance that is different on what that threshold is that they provide service for. I think Newton's is probably one of the worst that I've heard, where there's no threshold at all. It has to do with our permitting system. And to like dead honest, we do not have a very clean sheet of who we provide service for. And that is extremely common across other municipalities in the state, and I think other states. But it gets very messy very quickly. And so I think the access, trying to say that we have 95% access, I can easily, combat that.
Thank you. Dylan?
Yeah, thank you. I just wanted to chime in and just in particular around some of the fear mongering that happened on the comment previous to Juanita. The comments of chip manufacturers or the food manufacturers taking over a recycling system is just simply not true. That's not how any EPR system in the world works. They and to Juanita's point, there is not in the Massachusetts bill that's being considered, there is not a command and control style EPR system being proposed that would take over a recycling system. There is huge business opportunity for the haulers and service providers within EPR across the country. What is being proposed or what is being levied at the concept of EPR by a lot of those haulers and service providers on this call is simply not reflective of the EPR laws that have passed around the country. And I understand the concerns, but I would encourage folks to look at how these laws are being passed, the regulations that are being promulgated by the state regulatory agencies, and to show that individual brands are not going to be impacting or directing what happens in these EPR laws, but rather a producer responsibility organization, which is an aggregate, and they are experts in the space. The PROs in Canada do a wonderful job at engaging with service providers and delivering on the promise of EPR as they have around the world since the 1990s, where Germany was the first one to pass. So I just wanted to chime in and correct the record on that. Thank you.
Yeah, okay, so Dylan, I think you owe the group an apology. So you should not defame someone for making a comment in the manner which you did.
I'm sorry, who is speaking? I didn't defame anyone.
You used the pejorative of fear mongering. I think that the individual who raised the concern is that it's not a falsehood, is that large corporations are the majority of the producers are going to be impacted by this. And we are putting in their hands a tremendous amount of control over the future of recycling when we push programs like EPR. And so using the word fear mongering is a derogatory statement. I think you owe the room an apology.
I don't believe I owe the room an apology, and I believe that was a factual statement that I made. Thank you very much, Michael.
Dylan, can I? This is Chris, who you said that I was fear mongering. Can you tell us who sits on the board of the Circular Action Alliance, the sole PRO that's been selected by most of the states that have passed legislation?
Oh, absolutely. Certainly, producers are the ones that control that organization, but the organization itself they are highly regulated by the state regulatory agencies that have to direct what activities occur in each of those states. And they are not, individual brands are not saying, this city gets this investment, this MRF gets that investment. That is just simply
well, let me,
not how these
if
laws
everyone
work.
will if everyone just humor me, I'll read who sits on the board of the Circular Action Alliance in terms of their corporate affiliate. Keurig Dr. Pepper, ConAgra, Mars, Mondelez, Danone, Niagara Bottling, SC Johnson, Ferrero, Nestle, PepsiCo, General Mills, Amazon, Georgia Pacific, Procter & Gamble, IKEA, Campbell's, Starbucks, Target, Kraft Heinz, Coca-Cola, Colgate, Palmolive, L'Oreal, Walmart. Listen, that's who sits on the board, just so that everyone's aware.
Thanks, Christopher. I'd like to give people an opportunity to raise their hands before they speak, just out of respect for everybody in the room. Scott, you have your hand raised. I appreciate that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, so I want to, I want to thank Chris for, for really being honest, I think, about, some of the concerns that he has. And and Dylan as well has a tremendous amount of experience on this. So I think that we're all really trying to figure this out, trying to figure out what to do here or recommend for Massachusetts. I just want to say that when these programs were starting up in the United States, producer responsibility, I mean, we've been discussing this for 20 years. And when the British Columbia system passed and it went right to producer responsibility, many of us thought, oh, well, the first programs in the US would probably follow suit and follow the full producer responsibility model. Well, it didn't happen. And so when Maine came out, and there was Maine, and then Colorado, and then there was Oregon, and other states were sort of the leaders here. What happened was the municipalities themselves and even the state governments didn't quite trust the producers because they were opposing EPR for so long. So we went back, or they went back into the reimbursement model, which is, I think, what Juanita was or Claire was saying. It's a reimbursement model. It's because the system is, hey, you're already as a municipality contracting with, such and such local company or whatever, or large company. Some of them are quite large, as we know, multinational companies. And your choice is that. And so it's less of a disruption in the system, but it was a change. So these fears are real. And I want to also, bring in Councilman Delgado and say, I'll say from Product Stewardship Institute, and probably the majority of people here on the phone, is that we don't want to negatively impact businesses that have like Chris's business and others, have invested for 40 years or more in the change towards recycling, away from just garbage disposal into recycling and composting and other. They've invested billions of dollars across the country, and that is they want to rightly protect those investments. And these are the issues that we all need to navigate together as we move forward. The PRO, Producer Responsibility Organization, Circular Action Alliance, is all producers, but that's why there's an advisory council or advisory board, as they're called, which is multi-stakeholder, and that does give the the opportunity for ongoing and very critical input to the PRO as well as the state government. And the state government is the one that is going to make the ultimate decisions here. And they have to take into consideration, how the program's running, make sure that the businesses that they've been nurturing as a state and the local governments over the years, that they're not disrupted. No one wants that to happen. We want there to be thriving businesses. And I mentioned before about some of the businesses that will be thriving more, and I'm thinking more of the manufacturers of the materials, but also there's going to be a change here and opportunities for those that are collecting already. We're not seeing major disruptions, at least I haven't, and maybe others are seeing them moving forward, and we have to talk about them. But we care about the businesses that are collecting right now. We have to. It would be irresponsible of us not to care about those. But it shouldn't mean that we're not going to move forward and fix a system, as was mentioned, that is really inefficient. 351 municipalities all doing a different thing, and consumers all across the country confused about what to do. So this is going to be a 50-year effort. Let's face it, with EPR, it's going to be a while, and we can't expect to snap our fingers and get to where we all want to go. But moving forward together is the first thing that we need to do. And I think this call is a great first step moving forward.
Thank you. Lou and then Calvin.
Thanks. I just wanted to say, I think it's naive to believe that many of the companies that Chris had mentioned before, who are investing billions of dollars in PROs across the country that they have to take part in, are not going to decide how waste and recycling are handled in this country. So I think we just really need to look at that.
Calvin?
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on those comments, I think it's really critical that we don't underestimate the role that producers play in shaping the system. So Ontario and Manitoba had a reimbursement model where producers reimbursed municipalities, but they decided we don't want to reimburse your actual cost. We'll reimburse you a best practice negotiated cost, which was a very complicated mechanism for assigning what cost would be under a ideal system. Second to that, after the adoption of full producer responsibility in 2021, many northern municipalities in Ontario and Manitoba lost their service because producers said that it's too costly to provide a program to them. And so, while yes, I fully agree with the earlier comments by Scott and others in terms of ensuring that there's adequate guardrails and safety mechanisms to ensure that producers don't have wholesale control of the system. But given that they play such a critical role in operating the PRO, we can't ignore the fact that they have a heavy hand in shaping the way the system looks. And if we look at Canada as a proxy, they've had significant influence in shaping the way the system is designed to the detriment of municipalities and to the detriment of service providers. And I think if anybody says that this is potentially a biased comment, I would encourage you to reach out to Ontario municipalities, BC municipalities, Manitoba municipalities, and ask them how well they think EPR is going under the new adopted model.
Thank you. David?
I really appreciate all this thoughtful concern about the role of a PRO and how an unregulated or underregulated PRO can cause issues. What I think it speaks to ultimately is the critical importance of getting the legislation right, and particularly empowering DEP, both in terms of the legislative intent and what's actually in the statute directing the work of the PRO, and also in ensuring that the state agency has the authority to compel the PRO to act in the public interest, and to hold them accountable in the event that they're not. So I think what we're hearing is that it's really critical to get on the front end to set up a system where a PRO is subject to significant oversight from the state agency acting in the public interest, and that this is not a problem for this group, but also I think my friends at DEP will quietly nod their heads as I say part of that is ensuring that DEP has the staff and resources needed on the budgeting side, to support that work as well, that's a whole other meeting that you guys don't have to be part of. But I think I hear the concerns, and I think that there's a clear what the solution there is for the administration and the legislature to step up.
Thanks, David. Dylan?
Thank you. I just wanted to echo thanks for both what Scott and David had just said, and just to highlight a couple of quick things. One, just that we are discussing, and as we're referencing the Canadian EPR systems, which makes sense, they're more mature and they've been around for a long time. They are to use what Calvin used statement earlier, is that they're really comparing apples to oranges, because they're very, very different laws than what are being passed here in the United States. And I also wanted to say that one of the nice innovations that we've seen as EPR laws have passed in the US is that we have advisory councils that are made up of multi-stakeholder groups, from producers, from service providers, from local municipalities, environmental justice groups, NGOs, that are reviewing the program plans that are delivered by this producer responsibility organization who are charged in delivering on the goals and these laws, providing feedback and essentially making sure that it is being directed fairly, adjusted, and making sure that everyone is still made whole. I have the honor of sitting on the advisory council here in Oregon, the first state in the US to have EPR enacted. And it's just, I just want to kind of talk past like this theoretical and actually talk about what is happening on the ground. And it's been really wonderful to see the collaboration between the strong state oversight in Oregon DEQ, the local service provider and hauler and MRF community, and the PRO working together to make this type of law work. We know it can work. We will see it work. And I think it would be able to work in a state like Massachusetts as well. Thank you.
Michael?
So I think, and I finally found the raise the flat hand thing. I think one of the things I've heard is that we all agree that there is going to be a significant cost increase. What I think that I would ask people to consider is that a vast majority of that is administrative and has actually little to do with the physical process of effectively capturing recoverable materials. And I think if you had an opportunity to sit down with my membership and really walk through the art of the possible, if the objective is you want to recover more materials, the private sector, one, is willing to put the capital up, and two, is prepared to be able to do that at a far lower cost than what you were going to get from EPR. And at the end, far better reuse of the materials if, in fact, coupled with that, the state would pass content commitment legislation to support secondary markets. And this is our fear about EPR programs is the overarching cost of managing it, the administrative part that doesn't do anything in the actual physical capture. Those numbers, as Calvin noted, compound well above underlying inflation. And the concern you should be very, very fearful of is that at some point, do the producers wake up and say, no, Moss, we didn't bargain for this. And if they walk away from it, then you're going to have a public that has one more reason why they don't trust recycling. And we think we can deliver you what you want at a much lower cost because we've done it very successfully in many other jurisdictions where you don't use EPR to create this. If what you want to do is transfer the burden of who's paying, this is what EPR does, but you do it at an significant inflation to the overall cost of the outcome. That would be the one thing we hope that this group takes into consideration.
Thank you. Scott?
Wow. Well, I'm just going to say you can't talk about costs without the benefits. And the world is moving in this direction. And so, we can either recognize it and work with it, and work together, as Dylan was saying, and seeing that and participating in that and seeing the give and take of powerful groups, the retail interests, the manufacturers, the brands, the waste management companies, local governments, state government. There's a lot of powerful interests here. And the reason that EPR has gained momentum is because it's moving us forward in many categories of social, economic, financial, environmental, all of the, many of the key indicators of a quality of life, if you will. And it is geared for business. It's geared for good business, and recyclers are part of those businesses. So I just, we have some differences of opinion here about whether or not EPR is a good system. It is moving around the world. We're talking also Africa, the Middle East, South America. It's growing. It is expanding rapidly. And so these are the things that, that we need to acknowledge. And I just wanted to to put that on the table. These are all really important comments, but I don't agree with all of them. And for us, it's just, we need to solve a problem. We have a big problem now in terms of, the waste, the cost, the environmental issues. EPR is a solution to problems. And if this isn't the solution, then some of the other ones, now Chris mentioned, one solution that, pairing up recycling with waste for if you have a contract for waste, you got to have that's another solution. Maybe there's others that can be in place of EPR, but the world's not thinking that way.
Thank you. We have about 8 minutes left before the end of this meeting, so I want to make sure we get to all the comments and all the hands that are raised. So if you don't mind addressing your comments really quickly at this point on, I really appreciate it. Abby?
Thanks, Jen. I think this has been a fantastic discussion. I've been involved with these EPR conversations for many years now. I'm kind of impressed with the level of discussion. I think it's evolving. I think we've come a long way. Still a lot to work out, though, a lot to learn. I wanted to say in particular, we've heard a lot of genuine, heartfelt concerns, I think, from municipalities, from haulers, from recyclers. Haven't heard as much from producers, environmental justice groups. And so I would just invite, I think we as commissioners are really tasked with understanding this from multiple directions. So if you feel like you represent a different perspective and you haven't talked yet, I would invite you to talk now.
That's awesome. Thank you. And please feel free to reach out to me after this meeting or the DEP staff. This is not the end of the discussion. This is what the commission will take up in a couple of months. But I agree, this has been a very fruitful conversation so far. Sharon.
Thank you. I thank you for this tremendous conversation. I am learning a great deal. And I have a lot more to learn, but just a couple of points, just echoing what Scott just said, EPR is not going away. I think we have a needs assessment bill. We have the opportunity to learn from others and but take the time to investigate and make the right decisions. I think we need to move away from, this take, make, dispose model that we have that was so well articulated by Dave Melly. I want to repeat what several people have mentioned is that we have a disposal capacity crisis in Massachusetts, and nearly 50% of what we generate is being exported out of state, which is also adding to our greenhouse gas emissions. So we really need to look at this holistically. In terms of what I'm seeing from a municipal point of view, there's very little competition. Communities that I formerly served maybe get 1 or 2 haulers that will respond to a bid. Prices are just out of control. People don't know what is and isn't recyclable, despite having a really great Recycle Smart program. And again, the access that an EPR program will provide to all households is significant. Again, thank you all for your input. I've really appreciated it. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Kashida. Calvin, and then Juanita. Did we lose Calvin? I think you may have hit the wrong button. Juanita.
So I just wanted to address the comments about that industry has a way of doing this so much more cost effectively. I guess I'm wondering why that hasn't already been done, if that is possible. If there's, again, we've pointed to one very glaring policy mechanism that could be put in place that would improve access statewide. Somebody said, I think we'd all be on board with that, and I certainly am. But the reason that EPR is moving forward in all of these other jurisdictions is because they've explored all the other options. voluntary measures have failed. Voluntary commitments from various sectors of the industry have failed. In California, they gave every material sector every opportunity to offer solutions for how to increase collection rates. It was almost as if they were like, okay, we're going to give you every opportunity before we start looking at EPR. And every industry sector, material sector, was not able to come up with innovative ways for how they could change anything. They just kept pointing to what they're already doing and the system as it is and saying like, it's already great. And again, clearly the data point to it not being great, which left California the only direction to move in was EPR. And I think that's happening more and more in different states. I think Oregon's model should really be looked at because it's broader than just EPR. It includes EPR as a funding mechanism, a sustainable funding mechanism for the program, for the system, but it also had universal access requirements, different these other provisions that are a much wider reform. And I do think that that needs to be part of the conversation as well. I just think that I don't think it's how could it get worse or, what do we have to lose, as was paraphrased for my previous comments. I just think that doing everything the way that we have been doing it and just thinking like, oh, if we just try harder, it'll get better. It will not. And there is a lot more investment that is needed from an education perspective. There's a lot more uniformity that is needed to resolve a lot of the public confusion issues. And that's not quick. Like, I think Scott's comment about 50-year timeline is exactly what we should all be thinking on. It's certainly where I'm thinking. And I wouldn't expect that, EPR in Massachusetts is getting past this session. Like, I think we can all from this conversation agree that that is not likely to happen. But I think that this is an important conversation that this state needs to start having. And PSI has identified, I forget the number, 20 elements, 22 elements, Scott. 16. Okay, that's even more achievable. 16 elements of EPR systems that every single one of those merits at least a 2-hour conversation like this to walk through the details, walk through how each stakeholder group is impacted. The amount of time allocated for this within the commission process is woefully inadequate for the enormous scope of packaging EPR. So I'll end there. I could go on, and there's lots of other things said that, I would have comments on from a municipal perspective. But I agree with other comments that this was a much more constructive conversation than the first meeting. I think that it'll be difficult and interesting to pull together information from these two conversations and bring it to the wider commission. And I mean, I'm not going to advocate for another meeting like this on packaging specifically, but I think as the wider commission, it should be at least 2 meetings talking about packaging. I think Councilor Delgado stated it very well that the other material categories that we were looking at as a commission are they're much narrower in scope than packaging. And from a consumer perspective, they're things that are much less frequently purchased than packaging. So I think that it merits a lot more time and consideration from the commission.
Thank you so much. And I apologize to the 4 of you who have your hands raised. We're at time, it's noon. This discussion, so many notes, and there's so many topics that I think I'm going to be able to highlight and, at least do a little more homework or research a little bit more for the commission. But I think these are all great points, and I really appreciate this discussion. So thanks to everybody who came today and participated. Again, if you have additional comments, please send them my way. You should all have my email address. And if you don't, I will put it in the chat right now. So that's everything. Thank you so much.
Jennifer, also the public portal, on DEP's website where comments and reference to documents are welcome, and it's an opportunity for anyone to kind of provide additional comments.
100%. Thank you, everyone.